I'm going to have to learn how to edit out the front part of the video anyway, so I may as well do it before we release this. How's that? Um,
Yes.
Thank you, Kimberlee Wood. Thanks for being here. My name is Brad Geyer, and I'm with the Former Feds Group Freedom Foundation. And
Hmm.
you were kind enough to reach out and contact us about your experiences in regards to the passing of your husband and the treatment he received at a United States hospital.
Hmm.
You're also a member of um, the former Feds Group Freedom Foundation's Remdesivir Survivors Group and Action Committee. And I'd like to thank you for being here today. How are you today?
I'm okay today. Today's just it's kind of beginning, but as the day goes by, things happen. Some days are better than others, but
Tell us how it is that we came to meet each other. Tell us about your what you've been through.
well, my husband and I both, well, he contracted um COVID-19. He was diagnosed July 29th. Came home and I wasn't feeling sick. Well, let me back up. That Wednesday night, July 28th, he came home from work that afternoon and was complaining of shoulder pain. Um, he's a generally healthy person, never goes to the doctor for anything. He was always, very healthy. And here I am with all the comorbidities, the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol. I take 4 or 5 pills every day, and he hardly ever goes to the doctor for anything. So he just said his shoulders were hurting, and I said, okay. And he said, well, because of COVID protocol, he said, I have to go be COVID tested because this is a symptom of COVID is body aches. And I said, okay. So we moved him into the spare bedroom because he didn't want to get me sick. Well, that Wednesday night we slept in the same bed. And then that Thursday morning, he went to CVS and was tested and came back and said he was positive. So we moved him into the spare bedroom. He was wearing a mask around in the house. And I had told some friends of mine that he had tested positive for COVID. And um, they said, well, watch his oxygen, and so then I was fine Thursday. I was fine Friday. Saturday morning, I woke up with a scratchy throat. Um, and as the day went on that Saturday, I started feeling a little worse. So Sunday, when I got up, I did feel bad. Um, and then Monday, I went and was COVID tested myself, and it was positive. So he
Oh,
continued.
God. Yeah.
Yeah, we both had it. Don't know where we got it from. Nobody we were around the weekend before at the beach was sick. I stayed with my goddaughter and her family. None of them got sick. So we don't know where we contracted it from. Um, and so he continued to stay in the spare bedroom. And, you know, that somebody told me then, y'all need to monitor your oxygen. If you get below 85, you need to go to the hospital. So I went online, bought a pulse oximeter, and, put it in the room with him with all of his other stuff because, they just told him to take Tylenol and Advil and go home and, you know, you'd be fine.
Wow.
So, but when I tested positive, they gave me a Z-Pack. The doctor gave me a Z-Pack and told me to take Tylenol and the Z-Pack, of course. And if I felt worse, to go to the ED. So I he was, sitting around, and I could tell, by Monday he didn't feel good, and his oxygen had creeped down to the low 90s and the high 80s, and so I was starting to get concerned. Mine was in the middle to low 90s. Um, so he was sitting in here on Tuesday morning in this recliner that I'm sitting in right now, and he checked his oxygen, and I said, "What is it?" Because we would do it like 6 or 8 times a day. And he said, it's like 85. And I said, babe, I said, your oxygen is continuing to go down. I said, you need to go to the hospital. I said, you need to get some help. I said, because you're sicker than I am, obviously, because his oxygen was dropping. And so he said he didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave me. And I just kept telling him he was sicker than I was and he needed to go. So off we went to the hospital. Well, I get to the door. He didn't want to get out of the car. And I told him, I said, it's going to be okay. I said, just go get some help. And I said, if they don't admit you, call me and I'll come back and get you. Because I didn't even get out. I knew they wouldn't let me go in. So there was no point in me getting out.
Can I pause you just for a second, Kimberlee? I haven't been to the hospital since this all happened. And you're right. It occurs to me, you know, that's an odd new feature to American life where a wife, you know, does the drop off at the curb. And of course, that's because it's required now.
Yeah.
So somebody's co-pilot or somebody's second pair of eyes who can be keeping an eye
Yeah.
on things and making sure everything goes well, they're not permitted to be there with the person.
No. And they kept me from him for over 30 days. Oh, he's still contagious, or oh, he has pneumonia. He has, oh God, what is that that's in your sputum? Some kind of infection. You know, my whole thing is this: if a doctor and a nurse can suit up and go in a freaking room, why can't a loved one suit up the exact same way and go be with their loved one?
Mm-hmm.
Why? It makes no freaking sense to me.
Yeah. So you dropped him off,
I
and then
did,
you
and I
briefly
sat there. I sat there for a good 10 minutes because I didn't want to leave. And, you know, he again told me when he got out of the car, I don't want to leave you. I said, I'm okay. I said, if I get worse, I promise I'll come. But I said, I'm okay right now. And I was having a little trouble breathing. I would get winded and then have to sit down to recover. So he FaceTimed me and he said, well, they're going to admit me. And I said, okay. He had 2 IVs in his arm already. He sent me a picture of that. And he said they were trying to get him to lay on his stomach and he was sweating. He said, I can't lay on my stomach because he had like, we called it a beer baby belly. And so and I said, so you feel like you're a teeter totter laying on your belly? He said, yeah, and it's getting on my nerves. But anyway, so, and they had in, you know, oxygen on him. And so then they finally came to get him to admit him at like 12:30 a.m. That Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. So then he went to Wesley Long Hospital in Greensboro. And so we FaceTimed every day, and every day, like I took him on the 3rd and I took a picture of him. The 6th day, which is after the 5 days of Remdesivir, the 6th day he had on a rebreather mask, not oxygen in his nose anymore. He still had that, but he also had on a rebreather that had a bag on the bottom of it.
Let me see if I can pull up that. Let me see if I can pull up that hospital bill. Now,
Clue number 1, you're already gone from a nose cannula to a rebreather mask on your 6th day being in the hospital. And that hospital bill right there shows he got 3 doses of Remdesivir on day 1. 3.
We have, just for anyone watching this, we have on August 3rd of 2021, we have Remdesivir, 100 milligrams. The billing is $1,000. Then on same day, 100 milligrams, SOLR, 1 each vial, 1,000. And then same day, Remdesivir, 100 milligrams, 1,000. So right off the bat, And then it's interesting because HC Ed critical care first 30 to 74 minutes. Oh, that's probably billing code for
Yeah.
uh, bringing him in. And by the way, our investigative team, I don't know enough about this, and right now we're just gathering facts, but we have a extensive experienced investigative team um, investigating all the different financial incentives and decision making that is behind these current protocols. But let's stick to the matter at hand, which is you're you're at basically you're at home and you're able
Mhm.
to communicate him by FaceTime.
Mhm.
It's 6 days after he's been admitted, after
Mhm.
5 days of remdesivir, and explain for anyone watching this the changes you saw. Just again, your only contact with him is by FaceTime.
Yeah. And we didn't talk. Um, we would maybe talk in the morning. When we got up, and then I would basically let him try to rest and recover. And then I told him if he needed to talk to me to call me, but just to rest and try to recover because they kept telling him he was going to be moved out to a um, rehab center for pulmonary rehab. But he just kept his breathing and his O2 sats kept dropping. So on the 17th of August, I talked to him that afternoon and he cried that night and he cried. He was scared and he said, I just took a poop. And he said, my oxygen dropped in the 60s. And he said, I couldn't even wipe myself. How humiliating for a human being. You can't even have your wife or your family member there to help you. You got to let some stranger come in there and wipe your behind and help you get back in the bed. And he said, I don't understand why I'm not getting any better. He said, why can't I kick this? He said, I'm a healthy person. And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And so the 18th, we talked and he just didn't feel good. And so then he called me and he said, they're moving me down to ICU. And I said, okay. He said, they said I need more oxygen than they can give me up here. I said, okay. So they moved him down there. And I talked to him that night. And of course, they were trying to get him to wear a BiPAP because his oxygen had fallen so much. And so he said, this thing is so hard to breathe. And he said, I'm trying, babe. He said, I'm trying hard. And I said, I know that. And I said, just keep trying. I said, there's thousands of people praying. And I said, we just have to trust that God's going to bring you home. So I got woke up on August 19th at about 7:15 in the morning by a FaceTime call. And it said Steve Wood. So I picked it up and it was his nurse, a nurse. And she said, we're getting ready to vent your husband. And he wanted to talk to you. And I said, okay. So she put the phone in front of him and he had a BiPAP on. So I could barely hear him. But I know what he said. I could hear him enough. He said, I can't breathe, babe. They're going to vent me. And the last words out of his mouth was, I love you. And then he waved bye to me. So when I talked to the doctor, he said that Steve consented to the vent because he said, if it's going to help me, then I'll do it. And the doctor said he was very scared And he was alone. Nobody was there. So I'm thankful that the last words he said was, "I love you," but knowing that he was scared just torments me every day.
Well, I'm sure that he knew that you and others were praying for him, and I'm sure that it would have been a comfort to him knowing you were there, even if not in your physical presence. I'm sure he felt you very strongly. Um, you know, I can't. We've heard so many stories like yours. We can't even count them anymore. And the fact that U.S. hospitals are killing people with remdesivir, um, there's going to be accountability. This general acknowledgement among Americans that this is happening, and it's happening in an institution that at one time was built around the Hippocratic Oath and making sure that they provided proper care to Americans and loved ones like your husband. And we're doing our investigation. Enforcement agencies, for whatever reason, don't seem to have any interest in getting down to the bottom of how so many people how many innocent lives have been snuffed out. We've had uh, so many people that have been killed, um, and our best information, and it's fragmentary, and it's not totally clear, which of course dark forces use that to their benefit. But it seems to us that there are many people who are having their health compromised and their ability to fight back against COVID-19 compromised by this remdesivir drug, or even the remdesivir drug is killing them. And this drug is imposed by FDA protocols. So the federal government comes in and they say, you must use this. And remdesivir had flunked the second series of tests in August of 2019, and it was denied. It was withdrawn from a study in Nigeria because it was killing so many Nigerian children. And flash forward 6 months later, it is the first line of defense that the United States chose to fight COVID-19. It can only be used late stage, intravenously, which means that it had no applications for early use, which of course means that, or at least let's not, I mean, I have different theories for why that was arrived at as the drug of choice and the drug of mandate. But the result was that FDA protocol also drove the FDA protocol where physicians seeing COVID-19 patients would send them home without any medications. First in night. So your husband was horribly abused. The things that were done to him, I believe, ultimately will be deemed to have been crimes against humanity. And we and others are doing our investigation. And at some point, enforcement agencies in the United States government and the state government, there's going to be good people in those agencies, Kimberlee, who want access to the information that we've developed. And they're going to want to use that information to conduct proper investigations to see if and where there may have been crimes committed. And I believe there are many crimes committed. And so I want to commend you for just being willing to talk to me today and tell us about your profound pain that you never should have gone through. Let me ask you a question. Do you recall, did you ever see any advisories when leading up to this about vitamin D, or about hydroxychloroquine and zinc, or about ivermectin?
I had a friend of mine who makes organic elderberry syrup that I get from her. Um, messaged me and she said, "You need to get him on y'all need to be on vitamin C, vitamin D3, and zinc." And I said, "Okay." So I got all of that, and we were taking all of that. And at the hospital, when he was there, I asked the doctor, I said, "Can you check his vitamin D and C and zinc levels?" Because he wasn't getting any better. And I said, if he's deficient in these areas, maybe if you give him that, it will help. I'm here grasping at straws right now. So he was like, "Well," and this was always the answer I got, "It's not been proven in ICU patients." Um, so we really don't, it's not part of the protocol. And I said, I was so mad. I said, "I don't care if it's not part of the protocol. I'm asking you to test his levels. This is my husband, and I'm asking you. I don't care what you charge. Do the test." So he's like, and he was one of the doctors that I really liked. And he said, "Okay, I'll test it and see." And so the next day when he talked to me, he said, "You were right. His vitamin D was low. So we're going to give him some."
Well,
And so,
I would commend that doctor at being open and honest with you about that. Um, what what I'll say is we've noticed a powerful inclination that seems to have descended across the country where physicians feel like they're straitjacketed and their hands are literally in handcuffs and they're obligated to follow these standing orders that are just generated by a computer somewhere, and they have a very difficult time um, doing the right thing. Many don't know. Many actually think. I mean, this is like preposterous to me to even imagine that a United States physician could give remdesivir to a patient and actually think that it helps them. Like, it's the most preposterous notion in the world. Anybody can look at the research that's been done around remdesivir and know that it's a killer drug. And by the way, everybody at the FDA must know that. And if they don't know that, then they're professionally incompetent, or corrupt, or worse, and they should be drummed out of those agencies. Um, but clearly, the medical establishment is as much I don't want to say victim, but that's too strong. They've been compelled to follow in lockstep these crazy protocols that really have no benefit to anybody. Nobody ever heard of getting sick and being sent home without medication to allow the virus to incubate and cause organ failure. No one ever heard that before. Okay. And by the way, I'm going to say it again. These are crimes. This is criminal conduct. Okay. So whoever's watching this at the FDA, at the CDC, at HHS, at NIAID or NIH, you know what is going on is wrong. And you have legal protections that protect you from following illegal orders. These are well-established international laws. And you have an obligation not to follow illegal orders, whether they're printed off as standing medical orders, or they're given to you by a doctor, or whomever they're given to you by the hospital board, whatever it is. And I believe that in the future enforcement agencies and review boards who are looking at professional conduct are going to take an extraordinarily dim view of this. So I would encourage anybody in the healthcare profession, nurses, physicians who feel that they're locked in by these protocols and they're being forced to engage in actions that they know are wrong, please, you can call me. There's a way through. We can help. Among the other things that we've done is we have a draft of a leniency and amnesty program for all treating physicians and nurses, because ultimately, 1, 2, 3 years down the road, I think it's very likely that a lot of the things that make it, as a practical matter, impossible to actually give patients medications that work, a lot of the rationale or the directives or the procedures or the protocols that, as a practical matter, made that a mandate and nobody could object to or break away from, a lot of that will disappear with time. And you're going to be left with remdesivir being on the second list of medications that are able to be used. And it's going to look, in the future, looking back, people are going to say, wait, you could have used remdesivir, couldn't you? Why didn't you? And the physician will be left saying, well, I'd be retaliated against by the medical board. It would affect my reimbursements from the insurance company and the insurance carrier, or CMS from HHS, or I'd lose my board seat on the pharmacy board, or there'd be a state medical board investigation of me. Like all those reasons that are very real and keep these physicians, handcuffed. In a couple of years, it'll all just be scattered in the winds, and it's going to be left. The treating physicians and the treating nurses are going to be the ones who are going to have to justify this. And the problem is that it's very clear under the Nuremberg protocols, Helsinki, that the duty to engage in good medicine, evidence-based medicine, and not to engage in forced medical experiments, it flows down to the treating healthcare practitioner. So it goes all those levels down. It goes to the person actually administering it. And that ultimately is going to be a major challenge for a lot of people. So tell us, after he got put on the vent, what was your contact with him, and how did things go?
Well, at first they said they would hook me up to this video camera that was in the room and I could talk to him. Okay, now mind you, the camera's mounted way up at the ceiling, pointed down to him on the bed. I don't know how loud it was or if he could even hear me because of the machine that is running in there to suck out all the COVID and blow it outside, which makes no sense to me. They have these rooms set up and they have these big, huge pipes running from in the room, and this machine is sucking all this air and it's going to the outside. What sense does that make? So that was one of his things. He said, I can't even see outside. I don't know whether it's night or day. And look, that right there is enough to drive somebody crazy, not knowing if it's night or day. So that's the way his days went every single day. He said he only knew what time it was by what was on TV. But so they said, oh, well, you just let us know and we'll let you talk to your husband. Well, I did it one time. And I was like, yeah, I can't do this. I can't survive like this. So,
Wait a minute, so he was on a vent during this time?
yeah, he was on the vent. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And he's conscious for a lot of that time.
No, he wasn't conscious. No, after they called me and that morning and told me they were going to vent him, the nurse said, I'll call you back when we have him settled and give you the instructions on how you can call and see him or whatever. So they vented him, and then she called and told me about the camera that's in the room and how they can turn it on and it has a speaker. But it was very loud in those rooms, from what the nurses told me. So I don't know if he could even hear me that day or whatever. So
You tell
I,
from the video, was the video of good enough quality where you could tell, like, could he wave?
oh no, he was unconscious. They
Okay.
had him on, they had him on,
Damn sedated.
Dilaudid. They had him sedated and they had him on paralytic drugs.
Okay, yeah. That's the standard protocol, I believe. And by the way, to
Yeah,
get
but for a whole month.
this is another thing, and our Congress will never investigate this, but all the financial incentives for the protocol, for the giving the remdesivir, uh, there's a bonus structure essentially throughout the system, putting a patient on a ventilator, um, again, essentially a bonus structure. All of this is going to be investigated. I can't tell you that enough. And if it's not going to be me, it's going to be 1,000 people like me. You're not
Well,
going to.
and the thing that really makes me so angry is I was told, you know, well, after about a week, we're going to try to wake him up and da 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 this. Right. You're going to leave. How are you going to wake somebody up and you're giving them drugs that are keeping them asleep and keeping them paralyzed? I can't understand. That is what just makes me so angry. Oh, well, we're trying to wean him off the fentanyl, but yet you're giving him, what were they giving him in his feeding tube? They were giving him Clonopin and Seroquel. All
Yeah, we're gonna
that
we're
crap
gonna put
makes you
all the medication.
sleepy.
We're gonna put all the medications onto a timeline, and we're gonna
Yes.
then put all the billing records onto a timeline,
Yeah.
and we're gonna put all the communications that his loved ones had on a timeline, and then we're gonna take all the communications the hospital, all the medical staff will put on a timeline, and we're just gonna see what it shows. I mean, I have certain preconceived notions and strong suspicions about what it'll show, but I don't know. But we're going to look at that. We're going to look at that very hard. And not only that, we're going to develop a model for doing this. And we're going to spread it all around the country so other law firms can work hand in glove with victims so they too can look at this information in this way. And then we're going to gather the information, prepare it into tidy little packages, and refer it to state medical boards and also to enforcement agencies. So I don't know what happened because it's not really for us to use state resources to do investigations. Nobody seems to, in New Jersey, there were literally, they snuffed out tens of thousands of old people, seniors in uh, in nursing homes. It was a mini genocide. In New York, same thing, mini genocide in New York with senior citizens and Americans. They don't seem to really care. I mean, this is going on. I really the thing that's most perplexing of this is not just how the medical community has responded. It's how Americans have responded. Everybody acknowledges that tens of thousands of Americans were killed by nursing homes in New York and New Jersey and other states, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, maybe Ohio. Have you heard of any investigations? I mean, I've heard about a governor and some tryst that he had and that resulted in his resignation, but nobody cares about that. We care about mass death and genocide. That's what we care about. We care
Mm.
about hospitals being deployed to suck people in as if they're going to be helped and then given drug regimens and treatment that kills them en masse. That's what we care about as Americans. Sorry, Kimberlee, go ahead.
No, it's fine. And I mean, like the second day he was on the vent, um, for lack of not mentioning his name, we're going to call him Dr. Butthole. Um, he basically called me and told me that my husband was going to die. He said he's a DNR. We're putting him as a DNR. And if he has a heart attack, we're not going to do anything to revive him. We're going to let him pass peacefully. But since when do you get to make the decision of whether my husband is a DNR? I was livid. I called the hospital. I made a complaint about this doctor. I told them I did not want him to ever touch my husband again. I don't want him to look at my husband. I don't know. And so I went up to the hospital. They let me come up there, but I had to stay outside the room. And I talked to one of the doctors there that day. And thank God my goddaughter was with me because I had no idea what to ask. And she's a medical assistant in a doctor's office. And so she was asking all these questions. And, the charge nurse was down there and was answering her questions and whatnot. And, by that time they had him on continuous dialysis because he was not peeing. Imagine that. Wonder why he had renal failure. So, he's got a central line in one side of his neck. He's got the dialysis line in the other side of his neck. He's vented. I mean, all these tubes, all these IVs hanging there, and I can't go in and touch him. You won't let me put a gown on. You won't let me put a shield on, gloves. I don't care. If I had to wear a bed sheet or a trash bag, I wanted to touch him. I wanted him to know I was there. And, I was told that they weren't supposed to stay on these paralytic drugs for long periods of time. Well, I know they had him on them for a month. And when I talked to one of the doctors at the very end, he said, well, we had him on those paralytic drugs about a week and a half. And I said, excuse me? No, y'all had him on those drugs for about a month. And I said, and you wonder why he couldn't respond to you. You're giving him fentanyl and Dilaudid and, Versed and I don't know what else. And then you're going to put Klonopin and Seroquel in his feeding tube. And how are you weaning somebody when you're giving them all of this crap? And I was told, oh, we're going to wean him off. Yeah, you weaned him off all right. Then he went into AFib. And that was a few days before he passed away. And it was like, and as I mentioned before, there were thousands of people praying for my husband and me because this was the most difficult thing in my 56 years that I've ever had to deal with. I've lost both of my parents. I had to make the decision to cut the machine off for my mother. She died of fibrosis of the lungs in 2004. But this has been my hardest journey ever. So I had people praying for me as well. And God was all up in this the whole time. I'm angry because, why didn't he save him? But I have to know that I have to believe, I guess, that Steve's journey on this earth was done. But we weren't done. And I think that this drug and the combination of drugs that they give people is what takes their life. They're using it for population control. I honestly believe that. Steve was healthy until he got this drug. So it was to the point they moved him from Wesley Long to Cone on September the 15th, I think. Yeah, because he was over there about 8 days. I knew when they moved him, they were moving him over there to die. the kidney doctor said, oh, he's a candidate for hemodialysis. He doesn't need to be on dialysis every day. I was like, okay. I was very uncomfortable with them moving him because I had gotten very close to his nurses. They would call me using his phone and FaceTime me at least 2 times a day, put the phone to his ear. They were my surrogates. They held his hand. They rubbed his head. They did anything I asked them to do. And I don't know in my heart of hearts if they knew or if they know today that when people get on the ventilator after they've had remdesivir that they won't survive, because 99% of the time they don't. But he had developed another infection in his lungs. So he had double COVID pneumonia, they called it. And then he had developed another infection in his lungs. And so they took out all of his catheters and lines and were giving him what they called a line holiday to try to see if they could pinpoint where the infection was. On top of that, he had a pressure injury on his bottom. When I was made aware of it, it was purple and bleeding. So that just goes to show you that they weren't turning him, which caused him more pain. But I don't think he felt anything because he had so many drugs. But they went in on that. Well, I went in on that Tuesday on the 21st, and he looked really good. He didn't have any lines in his neck. And it was the first day I could call his name and he would look at me. He would open his eyes and look at me.
So he was
And
conscious. He was
kind of,
conscious.
sort of.
Yeah, I
Kind
didn't
of,
know
sort of.
that.
Kind of, sort of. Because, he would. And so I got right down and close to him and I said, babe. And he opened his eyes and looked at me. And I said, I know you can see me. I said, I know you're trying to see me because, they have all that goop in their eyes. And I could tell he was trying to focus. And so I spent that afternoon with him and I went home and I felt really good because he had responded to me. He still couldn't pick up his hands or anything, but he acknowledged me.
Kimberlee, I got to tell you, you made me feel better right there because I didn't realize that he had a period of clarity where he could actually see you, feel you, touch you. I mean, I know at the end, and if we'll try to play the video from the end, but it's not evident to me that he's conscious then, but he was really looking at you.
Was looking at me. He would open his eyes would be almost closed. And if I said Steve, he would go.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he would close his eyes back down, not all the way. And then I would say, babe, and he would go. And he would look at me. And so I thought, man, this is great. This is a really good sign. So I went home that Tuesday night, and that Wednesday they were going to try to put the dialysis line back in his neck. Well, I came up there after I got off of work. He looked like a totally different person. He was unresponsive. And he looked like somebody had just beat the hell out of him. And I said, what in the crap happened? I said, he was responding to me yesterday. Well, we tried to get his dialysis line in his neck, and his veins have stricture. So I had to be explained what that was, how the veins close up sometimes.
we got the catheter in, but not in far enough. And I said, okay, well, this was day 4 with no dialysis. His kidney numbers were off the charts. And so I said, well, what are we going to do? And they had talked about putting a line in his chest to do the dialysis. And I said, okay, I'm just trying to save his life at this point. So the nurse came up from radiology for me to sign the paperwork for them to try again on Thursday. So I signed it after I talked to her. And she got about almost to the door, and I said, ma'am, and she turned around. And I said, where are y'all going to try to go to put this line in? She said, in the other side of his neck. Well, that's where the damn line was before. So if you can't get it in this side of his neck, and you can't get it in the groin where you've never been before, how the hell do you think you're going to get it in the other side of his neck? So I'm sitting there with my husband, just like I'm talking to you right now. There was nobody in the room but him and I. And I had prayed Tuesday night my selfish prayer for God to heal him and bring him home to me and for him to have his life back and his health. And so I'm sitting there with him and I hear, there's your sign, just as clear as I'm talking to you. So I knew it was time to let go. And I called the doctor in there and I said, we're done here. I said, he's ready to go home. I said, he suffered enough. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't make him suffer anymore. And of course, I get patted on the back. Oh, you're making the right decision. You know, we feel like we've done everything we can do. We'll transfer him to comfort care tomorrow. So I spent that night with him. My goddaughter came up there with me. And my daughter, and we spent the night with him. I think I left the hospital after midnight because I knew the next day he was going to be gone. So we went up there Thursday and spent the day with him. And I did find out Wednesday night on his driver's license he was an organ donor. So I got really excited. I thought, well, at least my husband can live through somebody else, maybe. So I mentioned that. We had sit up there all day and had talked and, laughed and talked about memories and cried. And all of a sudden, my goddaughter goes, we forgot to mention the organ donor thing. And it was like 4 o'clock. So I called the nurse and the doctor in there and I said, he's an organ donor. I said, I don't know if with him being a COVID patient, if you can use anything. I said, but I want to honor his wishes to be an organ donor. Now, mind you, the whole day we were there, his vitals were steady, just heart rate like 75. His BP was like 120/80, 110/6. I mean, it was normal stuff. His respirations were good all day long. So they called Carolina Organ Donation. I can't remember the name of it. And the guy got there and they were looking at his liver. And so they said, he said, I need to go look at his medical records and his other tests to see if there's any other organs that might be viable. And I said, okay. Well, it was about, I don't know, 5:30, 5:45. The monitor just went nuts, beeping. And I jerked my head around and looked. Well, his heart rate had dropped to 45. His blood pressure tanked. and his respirations were slowing down. And I said, oh my God. And I told my goddaughter, I said, the angels are hovering in this room. I said, they're ready to take him home. So I got up to his ear and I said, baby, please hold on. I said, I know you're ready to go, but I'm trying to honor your wishes. And so he stayed like that for a little bit. And then the guy came back in and he said, the liver is viable. He said, but we need to take him down for a CT scan. He said, but I need to let you know that we might lose him going downstairs or we might lose him during the CT. And my goddaughter looked at me. She said, don't do it. She said, this is your last moments with him and don't do it. And so I just looked at him and I said, I'm sorry, I can't. I said, I don't want to give up my last moments with my husband. And then what if you can't use anything? And then it'll be all in vain. So he thanked me and he understood and he left. And they had turned up the Versed on the IV. And I told the doctor, I said, you better promise me that he won't know he can't breathe. And he said he won't feel anything. So they took his trach, they took the thing off of his trach, and he started breathing on his own. But it was very labored and, just that's how he would breathe. And we just watched the monitor just go down and down and down, and finally he was a flatline. At 6:23, he was gone. So I said goodbye to the love of my life, the only man who's ever really loved me. And now I'm alone. They took my whole world.
I can assure you that you're not all alone, and there's many people who've had to figure out how to go on after something like this. Um, I hadn't known that you had moments of clarity with him earlier on. That gives me a lot of
It's just
comfort.
one day.
Still, it's just, anybody hearing your story, it's a very hard story. And also having the wisdom to not go through with the CT scan and having those last moments with him was just so smart. Even at the end, you're able to think in a smart way, because I think that was really important, to have those last moments with him. If it's okay, I think we can do a little test here and see if we can even do this. But I have a video of that. I won't play it if you don't want me to.
No, you can.
Okay, let me see if I can pull this off. Hold on one second. I'm glad you had those last moments with your husband, holding him and comforting him in his final moments.
Just hope he felt it.
I have no question that he felt it, Kimberlee. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It occurs to me now that because we don't really have a lot of special effects and stuff like that, but it might be good to have at the beginning. I'll probably look to release this just the way it is because it's just so honest and raw and truthful and perfect. And I also don't want to wait because I'm thinking that maybe we can put a sacrifice to work right away and save other lives. So I really want to get this out. But when it's maybe at some point when it's re-edited, we can put some of the uh, the loving memories in the front, at the front of the video, so we can really get a sense as to who your husband was, who he is, and the good times with your family. And I'd also like to give people an opportunity to know who he really was. He wasn't just a guy in a respirator.
He was the most remarkable human being I've ever met. And I've heard stories from people he worked with. He was a barista at Starbucks, and I know I'll cut this short. But those girls in there, they were young. They always called him Papa Steve.
Huh.
And one of them is like a daughter to us. She comes and watches our dogs when we go out of town. She told me at the funeral, and she said he could always tell when we had a down day. And he would ask us if we were okay or if we wanted to talk about it. She said he would make us get a drink and take our break. And he said, "Come sit down and talk to me." I don't really think he knew how many lives he touched. He was just doing him. And he was amazing.
Well, thank you very much for your time today.
You're
We're going to get this out to as many people as we can. We're going to warn them: do not consent to remdesivir. It can and it will kill you. Something terrible has gone on in our country. We're not sure what it is. We don't have it diagnosed. I'd like to think that it's a systems problem. There's a massive systems problem that's bringing out the worst in all of us, and I'm no exception. If it were easy to fix, I would do it, or you would do it, or any of the people in that hospital would have done it. Something has descended on the country, and we have to work together to have this pall lift that will allow us to once again thrive as Americans. I'm sorry you went through this, Kimberlee. And all I can say is we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that your husband's and your sacrifice and your family's sacrifice wasn't in vain. We're going to try to turn this into a really wonderful thing and save many lives. And your husband will continue influencing, impacting, and benefiting people's lives far into the future. Thank you so much for your willingness to talk to us. Be strong, and we love you and we support you.
Thank you.